Welcome to the Invested Dads Podcast, simplifying financial topics so that you can take action and make your financial situation better. Helping you to understand the current world of financial planning and investments, here are your hosts, Josh Robb and Austin Wilson.
All right. Hey. Welcome back to the Invested Dads Podcast, the podcast where we take you on a journey to better your financial future. I am Austin Wilson, research analyst at Hicks & Zerker Capital Management.
And I'm Josh Robb, director of wealth management at Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. Austin, how can people help us with our podcast?
Well, first of all, we would love it if you'd subscribe if you're not subscribed already. So hit that subscribe, plus, follow, whatever button's on your podcast player, hit that right now so that you get new episodes each and every Thursday when we drop them. And if you'd like a little synopsis, summary of what we're going to be talking about each week, go to our website and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, and you'll get notified with those episode drops. So today, Josh, you recently had a birthday.
I had a birthday.
And you celebrated and had a good time going to Jamaica.
We did.
Bunch of friends. I mean, you actually have friends, so kudos to you.
Yeah. Well, they were a lot of my wife's friends.
Were they paid
They
friends?
were my wife's friends.
They were bribed, obviously, to go hang out with you for a handful of days, but we're glad you're back safe.
Yep.
Celebrated a pretty big one. 4-0. Josh has just recently turned 40, so we thought, let's make a couple episodes really talking about this pivotal point in your life, looking at your finances and like things you wish you knew in your 30s, is what we're going to be talking about today. And then next week, we're going to be talking about 40s.
Things to prepare.
Yep. So let's start with things Josh wishes he knew when he was 30.
Yeah, just thinking back 10 years ago, going back a decade, 2013.
2013.
Actually, that was the year I started here at Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. So I had made a job change.
True.
30-year-old, switching to a career I was passionate about, and it's been great. But as I think back, okay, what do I wish I knew as a 30-year-old for that next decade that was coming? And then also, we'll look at some of the things from averages and kind of our country. Where do people kind of stand at that point? So that's what drew all this. Man, I tell you what, here's some of the things. I'm just going to list them off. I made a list.
All right.
As I was kind of reminiscing about that last
The good old days.
Yeah. In your 30s, you experience life changes.
Yeah.
So job changes.
Yep.
It doesn't mean you quit or move, but you're going to see movement in your career. And really, your 20s, you're exiting college, getting an entry-level position somewhere, learning the ropes, finding out if you like what you're doing.
Right.
But that 30s, that's the decade where you really settle in, I think, to finding what you like. You may still transition and change jobs down the road. I'm not saying as a 40-year-old you don't. 30s, that decade there is really where you fine-tune, what do I like to do, and to start looking for that career.
What am I going to do for a long time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Kids.
Yeah. You had a bunch of them in your 30s.
I did. Doubled the number of kids I had. Yeah, kids show up, whether they're your first, second, third, or fourth, somewhere in that range. But that's when you start to experience that, and the kids start aging through that 10-year time period. So you go from no kids potentially to kids that are heading into middle school-ish age, fourth, fifth.
And think they're smart.
Yeah, fourth, fifth grade.
Man.
And we'll talk about that and some of the things to plan with that. I mentioned the job change, but in general, your income, you see a pretty big change in your income going out of your 20s and then through your 30s. And again, you're settling into your career, promotions, you get experience at that point. And so some of the things you got to watch, I get more income, but there's a lot of expenses that show up too. And that's the next thing, is there's new costs.
There are
a lot of new costs. Kids, I already mentioned that. Kids are not cheap. Kids cost money.
They cost money to have them. They cost money to feed them. They cost money to keep them.
Yeah, keep them happy.
That's true.
Insurance. So again, in your 20s, there's not a lot to insure.
No.
Yep. May have a car. Maybe you get a first home purchase, but 30s is really where you see a lot more home purchases showing
and
up.
You know what's more important in your 30s? Health insurance than it was in your 20s. Because you know what? You're probably doing okay.
Up to about 26, you could be at your parents.
Exactly. But you're also probably like a little bit more rubbery, flexible. Things don't phase you as much in your 20s. And then you hit that 30 wall, and then it's like, I need to go to the doctor. My back hurts.
Yep. And then on top of that, the other piece of the insurance is life insurance. Again, until you have responsibilities, so marriage, kids, those things, life insurance isn't as essential. But once there are people depending on you, that type of insurance goes up. So you got life insurance, disability insurance, all the things that when you need somebody else to rely on your income, you have to protect it. And then umbrella insurance. If there's something that happens and you're sued or there's a big payout that's needed above and beyond what your car insurance or home insurance would cover, umbrella picks up that. And so as your net worth grows, that concept of having some sort of protection piece shows up as well. So 30s is when you at least start thinking about some of that stuff.
Yep.
And then you said maintenance. I wrote this down. Maintenance. There's more costs to it.
There's more costs.
And your body is part of it.
Yeah.
You know, in your 20s, it took a lot for really to knock you down and keep you.
Well,
or maybe you just made dumb decisions.
You know what you could eat? Whatever you wanted.
Anything.
And it's cheap food, too. Yep. And then when you start getting in your 30s, you got to start eating right. Mm-hmm. And that's more expensive. Yep. That's one thing. But also maintenance goes beyond you.
Yes.
Maintenance goes to things like, hey, you bought that first house. Mm-hmm. Houses are freaking expensive to maintain. Not just buying them.
Yep.
Always something needed there. Your vehicles, maybe you were okay with not fixing that rattly whatever when you're in your 20s, but in your 30s, that's probably going to drive you crazy, and you're going to need to take care of it, especially if you have more than one.
Yeah, yeah. And a home you see a lot more people purchasing it, their first home right in that 30s. And so you're right. There's just a lot of cost and upkeep. There's a lot there. Here's one that I learned, family and friends. So in your 20s, coming out of college or being in college, and then starting your career, the longer you go out, the more people get established in what they're going to do and where they're going to be. So you see friends move around, leave. You may move or leave. But then as you add kids and add career and jobs, friends and family is important.
It is.
To keep your sanity. It's right there. But the overarching is just there's a lot of life changes that happen, not just to you, but to the people around you. So 30s is a lot in transition. That's really the word. Transition is where it's at.
One thing that we've found is that the circle gets smaller. Mm-hmm. It is when you're in your 20s, I feel like you can be friends with everyone and do everything all the time, and it's no big deal because you have time and availability to do that. Maybe you don't have kids, maybe you have less responsibilities, whatever that is. As you get into your 30s, it's like, well, there's like 3 or 4 people that I'm like really tight with because I have to focus on my kids. I have to focus on things I need to get done, so I only have a little bit of bandwidth to actually hang out and keep up with people. So your friends kind of get shook out.
Yes.
You can be friends with a lot of people, but you can only be really close with a handful of people or whatever.
And they tend to be in your same life stage.
Exactly.
Too, right?
Yep.
Is your single friends when you're married, it's not as fun for everybody to hang out. It's just as weird. And then you have kids and you have friends who don't.
Yep.
Again, for them, it's kind of like, oh man, this crying baby all the time. Why are we hanging out?
Yep.
Can't play Halo or whatever it is. So you're right. The family and friends, there's transition through there, and it does narrow for sure.
And I feel like your friends become the people that you spend the most time with. And that sometimes is by force and sometimes is by choice. But you really become, hopefully, if you're in a great work environment like we are, some of your best friends are like the people you spend a lot of time with at work. Yeah. And then maybe you've got a lot of friends you see at church, and you see those very frequently, and those are the people you become close with. And then outside of that, that's where it just really gets really hard because you have to be very intentional after that. So family and friends, very important and changing.
The last one, and this is probably later 30s, but time means more. In your 20s, time is really a commodity you don't put much value on. You have a lot of it, and the future you're looking forward to is bigger than what you're currently experiencing, right? You're always looking forward. But at some point, and I couldn't really pinpoint what that was in my 30s, but at some point in my 30s, you look around and you're like, man, I got to really value this. It changes. So there's more commitments, there's more time usage. You don't have as much flexibility or free time. But I think too is, I'm 40 now. As you look at your kids and they're aging, time with them is getting shorter and shorter. Just time becomes more valuable.
One thing that I've found is that you start seeing time as a commodity, like you said, and you can put a value on time.
Yes,
time is money, and you get more and more willing to spend a little bit of extra money to have more time.
Yes.
So whether that be a convenience thing, like getting things delivered instead of going and getting them, or vice versa, hiring someone to do something instead of you doing it yourself.
Changing your oil.
This is something you helped me with.
In your 20s.
It's no problem.
Change your oil.
Now, it's twice as much money probably to have someone else do it. But that's money well spent because you're not spending it half an hour climbing under a car, and you can have your family time.
That's right.
So, things like that I think are definitely worth considering. Now, you're in your 30s, and that's where I'm at, Josh.
Yes.
But I have a dad joke
I'm
of the
ready
week for you.
I'm ready.
It's more of a thought. Okay. So this is really where you're at right now in life. I'm not calling you fat, but I'm
for
saying a doctor says to his patient, you have the body of a 20-year-old, but you should return it. You're stretching it all out of shape. That's
I like
so
it.
funny.
I like it.
And your
That's how I feel
metabolism.
sometimes.
I feel like
Oh,
it hits a wall at 30.
Mm-hmm.
If not before, but for me it was like 30 on the dot.
Yeah. You
Cliff.
definitely have to
Cliff.
work harder to maintain where you're
A
at.
lot more intentional. So, Josh.
Those are some thoughts just about that decade.
But we got to turn this into a finance podcast.
So the first question, and this is a question a lot of people ask, is, am I on track? And so...
Can I answer that for you?
Yes.
It depends.
It depends. You're right. It's hard to answer that question based on goals and spending and all that stuff. But Fidelity, who's a very large custodian, you see all the commercials, they had kind of put out a rule of thumb for different age groups. And so this is how it works, is they say by age 30, so this would be entering your 30s, you should have the equivalent of 1 times your annual salary saved. So if you're earning $55,000 of salary, you should have saved by your 30th birthday $55,000 or whatever your salary is.
Now that's in investments probably.
So the way this
cash.
works is it counts retirement, it counts Roth IRAs, it counts taxable accounts. I don't think, at least in my own mind, that counts emergency fund. I think they're looking at savings for retirement, right?
Yep.
So anything that's retirement oriented, this is where this is falling. So then we go to the other end. So that was entering your 30s. Exiting your 30s, so getting to age 40, you should have 3 times your salary saved. So you go from 1 to 3 times during that 10-year period.
So in that same number-wise, if you're making $55,000, hypothetically you don't get any raises, you probably will. That would be $165,000.
Yeah.
Right.
Gotcha. Yep. And halfway through at 35, it's 2 times your salary. It just kind of works its way up. So the goal is, though, and this is where their math is, you should have 10 times your salary when you retire at age 67. That's kind of what it's working towards. And at that point, with a 4% withdrawal idea, then you're able to sustain it. So that's what Fidelity says you should do. Rule of thumb, again, varies for everybody. Fidelity is actually, based on looking at some of these other ones, they have a heavier savings up front and then slow it down over time, which, again, when you look at time of investing and compounding, that's actually a better concept. So they have you saving more sooner than slowing it down. But the goal would be, again, to get 10 times your salary when you retire. Now, if you were able to do that and you had 1 times your salary at age 30, you are ahead. The Federal Reserve, they do a survey in 2019, the last time I could get the data of consumer finances. The median retirement account balance for young people 35 and under, so 30 to 35, so that beginning part, $13,000.
Holy moly.
I'm going to guarantee you
that's not good.
The average salary was not $13,000.
No.
So they're not saving 1 times their salary.
No.
All right. Now, when you look at the median net worth, so that takes all their assets minus all their liabilities, it was $14,000. So they had $1,000 of net worth somewhere hanging out outside their retirement accounts. But that just tells you how far behind people are for this savings target, what Fidelity's using as that benchmark.
Yep.
And now that's the median. And so there could be some outliers that pull that different directions. But in general, that is telling us that most 30-year-olds are behind and they're going to have to play catch up.
Right.
I just told you in your 30s, you experience a lot more costs. It makes it harder.
And you have to make catch up now.
Yeah, it makes it harder to do that. In fact, that we see that trend continue, that people in their 40s and 50s being your peak earning years, by the way, you're still playing catch up and
it's
have
like
to do a lot
everyone's
more.
behind all the way.
Oh, yeah, the whole way through.
Because most people assume, I'm going to live on Social Security and it's going to be fine, which, you're not always going to get an 8% cost of living increase every year, and that's never meant to be all you live on, but people think it is.
Yep.
So I feel like people just underprepare for the whole time, and they don't really know what it costs to retire.
Yep. Now, part of that assets minus liabilities, that net worth, 40% of people younger than 35 have student loan debt with a median debt balance of $22,000. So there's actually more assets there somewhere, but they're being offset by that liability.
Right.
And then nearly half of people surveyed, same thing in 2019, carried credit card debt of an average or median balance of $1,900.
And that was in 2019 probably. So I would imagine COVID changed what that was. Credit card balances actually looked pretty good because everyone was flush with cash during 2020, during 2021. 2022, credit card balances start going up. And here in 2023, actually, things are looking worse.
Yeah. They're catching back up to where they were.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, if I was talking to a 30-year-old, and I'm talking to a 30-ish-year-old right here across from me.
Yeah, 30-some.
30-something. What are things you need to do? So I got some key takeaways for somebody in their 30s. So here it is. The first one, get rid of debt.
Get rid of it.
Yes. So we just mentioned the average student loan debt of people 30 to 35 is $22,000, right? Yes, $22,000. So focus on that. Look at that as a guaranteed rate of return. So if you're paying 8% on your student loan debt and you pay that off, you're saving 8% or earning 8% on that investment of dollars you're putting away. So student loan debt, knock that out. Credit card debt, highest interest rate you're going to find on just about anything.
That should be first.
Yeah. Knock that out. Do not carry a balance on that. Car loans, if you have anything coming out. Because again, in your 20s, you don't have a lot of cash. You don't have a lot of net worth. You don't have a lot of income, really. You probably got some debt.
Yep.
If you look at the average person. So knock all that debt out. Notice I didn't say home debt because there's an asset tied to that usually appreciates over time. So great to pay that off, but 30s, you may be making a dent in it, but not a lot of people pay off their home loan in their 30s. But all other debt, get rid of it.
Well, and there's a couple ways to do that we've talked about many times on this show, is whether that be the avalanche method or the snowball method. We've got a specific episode where we talk about this.
You can only talk about it in the winter.
And we're exiting that right now. So we're just going to say we're going to link that episode to the show notes here, and you can check that out. But there are multiple ways to get rid of that, a couple different approaches. So that's number one, get rid of debt. Good idea.
So that frees up cash flow. Knock some debt out, got extra cash because I'm not paying those debts. Start saving for large one-time expenses. In your 30s, there's a chance you get married.
Mail order brides are expensive.
Yeah. But if you're not getting married, there's a good chance you're going to be attending weddings.
Or in weddings.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
Yeah, not cheap. So start saving for those things that are going to happen. A home purchase.
You
need a down payment, so make sure you're saving for that. New car. By the time you're in your 30s, your car you bought that was probably a junker in your 20s is probably on its last leg. You got to get a new one for safety. Sometime the car's showing up.
Pro tip.
Yes.
Don't buy a new car if you don't have to.
Because it depreciates.
Depreciation right away. You can buy a couple-year-old one and knock off a huge chunk of depreciation, ideally paying cash for it because interest rates on a depreciating asset are not good.
Nope. College costs. So we talk about paying off your student debt.
Now we're planning
guess what? Kids are showing up. So start thinking for college. College is not cheap.
No.
And if you are planning on helping your kids, which there's all different philosophies on what you do with that, start saving early because like anything else, the longer you wait, the more you're going to have to save. And then speaking of savings, start saving.
Or increase your savings.
Increase your savings.
Absolutely.
Because again, for the average, the median, you're way behind. We got to play catch up. And so get a plan. 401ks, your company retirement plans, 403bs, wherever you're working, they probably have a match. Free money helps you increase your savings rate without you having to put anything more in.
We typically recommend at least just go get your match.
Yes.
We can do a lot of things afterwards, but get your match.
It's free money that you leave on the table if you don't do that.
My dad always told me that if you do not get your 401k match, you are making 5% less than your coworker.
Yep.
For the same work.
Yep.
So go get your match.
Yes. And then look through, Roth IRAs, or depending on your job and where you're at income-wise, you may still be eligible to put money in there in your 30s. And so max that out if you can as well. But start saving. So we got two savings things I just talked about. Short-term, one-time expenses, and then long-term retirement. In your 30s, when I was a 30-year-old thinking of retiring at, they use 67 as the full-term age, that's 37 years from that point.
Right.
That's a long time ahead. It's hard to think about it, but the dollars you can save in your 30s will help you get closer to that goal because they have more time to grow.
Yes.
And then the last one is monitor your spending. And this is very important. And so as you're exiting the 20s and going into your 30s, you will get some promotions. You may see a job change, those type of things where your salary is going to be moving up. If you get married, you may go from a single income household to a double income household. Those are the things where all of a sudden, boy, look at all this cash. If you let all that go into your budget and start spending it, that also makes it a lot harder for retirement because now your lifestyle, your living expenses are up higher.
Right.
And so just be very mindful of your spending and say, okay, what do we need to do now to keep us growing at a pace that's reasonable and gives us that flexibility with some extra cash.
When you know one way to do that. And we've talked about this before too. It's one of our favorite rules. It's called the 50-50 rule.
Yep. So
as you're in your 30s, you're probably going to be getting, hopefully, some raises every year or so. And say you get a 4% raise. Wonderful. That traditionally would beat inflation. Great. Yep. You should take half of that and have some fun with it.
Yeah.
Let your budget increase a couple percent, but take half of that, another couple percent, and just increase your savings.
Yep.
What this does is it helps your cost of living not to creep up as fast as your income creeps up, and juices your savings at the same time, so you're doubly prepared for retirement.
Yep. And then as you do pay off debt and do those things, that money that frees up, do something with it. Don't just let it sink into your budget and disappear at different places. So be mindful of your spending, get rid of debt, and save for one-time expenses and for retirement. Those are your 30s. If I was told that as a 29-year-old heading in, it was like, hey, this things you need to do, it would be very helpful.
Yeah.
And so the key is flexibility, because in your 30s, things in your life will change.
Yes.
For the better, most of them, but there'll be ups and downs. Adjust your plan accordingly, but have a plan and stick with that plan. Your goals may adjust, your time frame may adjust, all those things, but you need to know the why to keep you sticking with your plan. All right.
And those are tips from my favorite 40-year-old.
That's right.
For the 30-something-year-old in me.
There you
but
go.
Thank you for sharing those, Josh. Please stay tuned again next week where we're going to be looking at things you need to be looking at in your 40s, looking ahead for the next decade that Josh is now in. And thank you, Josh, for preparing this, and thank you for listening.
Yep.
Please always remember, if you have any thoughts or questions about your financial situation, you can visit our website at theinvesteddads.com and check the Invest With Us tab. You can set up a call, and we'll be able to see, hey, can we help you in any way? We would love to be able to chat with you, and maybe we're a good fit for each other in that way. And always remember, maybe you got someone in your 30s in your life, and you want to send this episode to them because it could help them.
Yep.
Share this episode
or
with
late
friends
20s,
and family.
Getting them ready.
Ooh, getting ready for the 30s. That's a great idea. And as a reminder, we'd love it if you subscribe or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So until next week, have a good one.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Invested Dads podcast. This episode has ended, but your journey towards a better financial future doesn't have to. Head over to theinvesteddads.com to access all the links and resources mentioned in today's show. If you enjoyed this episode and we had a positive impact on your life, leave us a review, click subscribe, and don't miss the next episode. Josh Robb and Austin Wilson work for Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. All opinions expressed by Josh, Austin, or any podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Hicks & Zerker Capital Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast. There is no guarantee that the statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance may not be indicative of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. Securities investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment plan or strategy will be successful.